Welcome to the Independent Dialogue for the UN Food System Summit 2021, Pathways to Sustainable Food and Nutrition, Consumption and Livelihoods. As we are all aware, the current COVID pandemic has reached crisis proportions and has impacted on millions of Filipinos in terms of their access to food and jobs and livelihoods. Unprecedented major efforts have been made by civil society through the academe, NGOs, faith-based organizations, and many others so that those in more marginalized situations are able to access food. Even before this pandemic, the Philippine government's Food and Nutrition Research Institute have indicated that about 30% of Filipino children are stunted and wasted, and this will have an impact on future generations of Filipinos. Thus, we are convening this Philippine leg of the United Nations Summit, which will be held in New York in September this year, to stimulate critical thinking as well as brainstorming with others in the academe and civil society, and even in the private sector, to understand the different issues and search for solutions, with the realization that if we are to reach the targets of sustainable development goals by the end of the decade, we have to start now and in many fronts. This event is being organized by the Ateneo de Manila University and the Xavier University, Ateneo de Cagayan, in coordination with the Philippine chapter of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, a network of universities and research organizations which are focused on building solutions to many socioeconomic development issues around the world. It is our hope that this will further inspire the organization of local-level community dialogues until May, which can involve our various stakeholders, faculty, student learning programs, the organization, outreach to communities, and many others in the course of our social development and social action work. And local solutions to address the long-term problems of to food sustainability can be found. We have organized a very interesting set of experts on various issues in food topics, and we hope that their ideas can percolate the dialogues that will occur in these local areas. I'm Randy Tuanyo of the Ateneo de Manila University and the Sustainable Development Solutions Network Philippines, who will facilitate the dialogue this afternoon. Some event guidelines and reminders. First, the event is being live streamed via YouTube through a link shown in the slide before you. We are therefore recording the proceedings of this event. Second, all participants are muted automatically as they enter this meeting room, but in case you haven't been muted yet, please mute yourself. For any comments or questions, please put them in the chat box. Conversations among participants are disabled, but you may send your queries to the main host of the event. Third, please answer the event evaluation survey at the end of the session found at the slide, and will also be shown later after this session. The link also will be sent in the comments box at the end of the session. Certificates of attendance will be provided to those who have answered the survey form. And for those who haven't yet renamed themselves, please also rename yourselves so that we will know who the participants are in this afternoon's session. Before we begin, may I call on Dr. Jaime Jim Acevedo, the Coordinator of Faculty Social Involvement and Assistant Professor of the Theology Department, Loyola Schools, to lead us in the opening prayer. Dr. Acevedo, Jim.
Salamat, Randy. I'd just like to check, can I be heard, Randy?
Yes, we can hear you, Jim.
Salamat po. So I'd like to invite everyone now to spend a moment of silence to feel the holy presence of God. You may now do the sign of your faith. Almighty and holy Creator God, praise be to your name. We lift up our gaze and offer our gathering this afternoon to you and seek your guidance and blessing. We pray for our people who continue today to suffer under the scourge of the COVID-19 pandemic. May we experience, O Lord, your saving power in the midst of all our frailty and brokenness. Call forth from among us the servant leaders who will be instruments of your saving will. On the occasion of our independent dialogue this afternoon, we gather to reflect together on another basic, overarching challenge that faces our nation: the challenge of addressing the crisis of food insecurity, hunger, and malnutrition, as well as the environmental degradation that destroys our land. Thank you, O Lord, for the blessing of our most distinguished speakers who will guide us in our reflection this afternoon. Through them, continue to inspire us in the midst of all challenges and trials. Open our hearts to the hope and vision of our land and people renewed. In all things, give us the courage and strength to persevere, and allow us to grow in compassion and solidarity with and for one another. All this we ask in the power of your holy name. All this we ask in the power of your Spirit of love. Amen.
Thank you very much, Jim, for that very inspiring prayer, and that will set the tone for our discussions this afternoon and the urgency of this issue that we are facing in terms of food security. And then to welcome us in the session this afternoon. As you know, this session is actually sponsored now by the Ateneo de Manila University and Xavier University Ateneo de Cagayan. Let us listen to the presidents of the universities in organizing this forum. Let's listen first to Father Roberto Yap. Unfortunately, Father Bobby Yap cannot join us this afternoon, but he has sent this video.
Father Marstan, Dr. Martin Frick, Dr. Cielito Habito, Father Pedro Walpole, Dr. Assunta Cuyegkeng, Dr. Larry Digal, Dr. Roehlano Briones, Mr. Oliver Oliveros, Mr. Edgar Valenzuela, Mr. Ruel Ravanera, Mr. Lino Rivera. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome to the Network Independent Dialogue on Pathways to Sustainable Food and Nutrition, Consumption and Livelihoods, sponsored by Ateneo de Manila University, Xavier University, Ateneo de Cagayan, and the Sustainable Development Solutions Network. Our three institutions organize this dialogue for the United Nations Food Systems Summit as a contribution to our common future for a more just and more humane society for our country and the global community. A recent United Nations Food and Agricultural Office report on the state of food insecurity in 2020 indicates that globally about 690 million people are hungry and about 2 billion people did not have regular access to safe and nutritious food in 2019. The COVID-19 pandemic may also have added about 100 million people to the total number of undernourished in the world. These figures are staggering and alarming. The same FAO report shows that in the Philippines, the rate of the prevalence of undernutrition was 14.7% from 2017 to 2019, and the pandemic has increased the number of hungry people by an additional 7 million. This reflects the three forms of malnutrition in our population: those suffering from mild, moderate, and severe forms of malnutrition due to chronic malnutrition, undernutrition from micronutrient deficiency, and obesity. Additional data from the Food and Nutrition Research Institute, the Department of Science and Technology, also shows that child malnutrition is a pervasive problem in our country, with around half of the poorest quintile of children below the age of 5 suffering from stunting. The issue of food access and availability is equally important, as poor people cannot afford to spend their incomes on healthy food. We have already seen how the price of palay has affected our farmers and how the price of pork has affected our consumers, not to mention the impact of the pandemic on the food supply chain. We in the Ateneo de Manila University have been doing our small part in responding to the challenge of health and nutrition in our country, especially among young children, through the feeding programs of the Ateneo Center for Educational Development and Gawad Kalinga Ateneo. With the Tanging Yaman Foundation and generous support of our alumni and friends, we have provided food packs to our social outreach partner communities throughout the prolonged and varying levels of community quarantine. Happy as we are of these efforts, we also know that it is but a drop in the bucket of the Philippines' tremendous hunger and nutrition problem. The continuing search for long-term sustainable solutions, therefore, is imperative. And since the issues of food security and sustainable food production, especially in light of the climate crisis, are complex, and the engagement of a broad spectrum of experts, practitioners, researchers, and leaders is necessary. The academic community, with its expertise in a wide variety of fields, clearly has a role in the search for solutions. Pope Francis said that the crisis of the pandemic, in a sense, has given us a chance to develop new ways of living. We must cultivate values, connections, and activities that are life giving. Responding to the challenge of ending hunger, Sustainable Development Goal number 2 is as life giving as it can get. By examining our lifestyles and consumption patterns, exploring innovative ways to resolve food insecurity and malnutrition in the Philippines, and influencing a new generation of advocates who will use their leadership skills to work for the realization of accessible, affordable, nutritious, and safe food and the promotion of healthier lifestyles for all Filipinos, we participate in God's eternal, creative, and life giving act. We are hopeful that this dialogue will be but the start of more. Together, let us build a just and resilient society with food and nutrition for all. Maraming salamat at magandang hapon sa inyong lahat.
Thank you very much, Father Bobby, for that inspirational welcome remarks. No? So as also Father Bobby, has set the tone of the challenges, of food security and nutrition in the country, and hopefully all of us will rise also to that challenge. Let us now also listen to the opening remarks of Father Marstan SJ, the President of Xavier University, Ateneo de Manila. Father Mars.
Maayong buntag sa maayong hapon sa tanan. Greetings from Cagayan de Oro City. Father Roberto Sia, President of Ateneo de Manila University, Dr. Martin Frick, Deputy to the Special Envoy for the United Nations Food Systems Summit, convener of this independent dialogue, Dr. Cielito Habito, speakers of this dialogue, Father Peter Walpole of the Society of Jesus, Dr. Maria Assunta Cuyegkeng, Dr. Larry Digal, Dr. Roehlano Briones, the organizers of this dialogue, Mr. Roel Ravanera, Mr. Edgardo Valenzuela, other organizers from Ateneo de Manila University and Xavier University, friends and participants from other schools and institutions. Again, good afternoon. Xavier University welcomes you to this independent dialogue on pathways to sustainable food and nutrition, consumption, and livelihoods. We already heard now how millions of people globally are experiencing hunger and malnutrition. Poverty, lack of access to affordable and nutritious food, civil war and natural disasters, as well as environmental degradation are some of the factors that contribute to food insecurity. food production, distribution, consumption, and food safety all have major impacts on the sustainability of our global food system. A paradigm shift from exploitative and extractive processes to sustainable food systems is therefore imperative. In the face of climate change, sustainable food security is imperative, where the right to nutritious food should be enjoyed by everyone, regardless of race, age, gender, religion, and geographical location. In this light, the forthcoming United Nations Food Systems Summit will be convened in September 2021 in the run-up to the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals 2030. The success of such an undertaking requires broad, deep, and sustained cooperation. A pre-summit conference will also be organized in Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome in July this year. Our aspiration in organizing this independent dialogue for the United Nations Food System Summit 2021 is to allow voices of community groups and other sectors, such as indigenous peoples, be heard and offer possible solutions to some of the issues from a grassroots perspective. In this manner, providing a voice to others at the margins promotes authentic human development. This will be done through decentralized community dialogues, which will involve different sectors in our surrounding environment to discuss issues on sustainable food production systems, including services and other ancillary systems without risking damage to the environment. Xavier University is committed to develop conscientious servant leaders who are productive citizens and dedicated to preserving ecological balance and integrity of God's creation for justice, peace, and development. In light of climate change, the problems of food insecurity and malnutrition, sustainable consumption, and equitable livelihoods need to be re-examined with open minds and reason, using the advances in science and technology towards sustainable agriculture. We will strive to develop site-specific farm plans using appropriate technologies towards viable farming models that would help our smallholders and agri-entrepreneurs in their food production systems and processes. We will examine value chain systems, keeping in mind the small farmers, fisher folks, and upland forest dwellers. This will boost our local economy and contribute to our nation's food security. The COVID-19 pandemic has brought new challenges in promoting nutritious food and healthy diets to strengthen the immune system. Nevertheless, we will encourage our faculty, student, and alumni networks to continue the search for meaningful solutions towards achieving sustainable development. Hopefully, we will contribute to develop a new generation of practitioners and advocates. Our faculty, students, parents, alumni, outreach community leaders to engage in meaningful dialogue for the future of food and food systems that would contribute to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. If we do not apply our minds and hearts now, we might face unintended consequences that can worsen vulnerabilities, be they might environmental, psychosocial, or spiritual. Providing pathways for solutions to wicked problems in agriculture, food, and nutrition from the perspective of grassroots and marginalized communities is in keeping with our Ignatian tradition to see, judge, and act. Thank you, and again, good afternoon to everyone.
Thank you very much, Father Mars for that very inspirational, another inspirational opening remarks. No? So you actually inform us of the challenge really of the developing a new set of leaders in terms of those who need to tackle this challenge of food security, food systems in the country. So thank you very much for that. And also the need to use the framework of analysis to be able to develop good solutions, the framework of C-Judge Act, so that every one of us can actually be able to contribute to tackling these challenges. As many of you have seen in the chat, so we would like just to ask everyone to name themselves. Some don't have their names, so can I just ask you to rename yourselves? For the next message that will be given to us this afternoon, as you know, this forum is the Philippine leg of the UN Food System Summit, which will be later held later this year. So let us listen to Dr. Martin Frick, the Deputy to the Special Envoy for the UN Food System Summit. Dr. Frick. Let's check if Dr. Frick has arrived.
He's here, Randy. He just wants to be unmuted. He cannot unmute himself.
So let's ask.
Good afternoon, Dr. Frick. May we request for you to turn on your video? We will look for you in the panel. Thank you.
Now it seems to work. Can you hear and see me?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. Well, apologies for the little technical hiccup, and good afternoon, and to all of you, good morning here from Germany, where I'm currently sitting. Let me start by thanking the two presidents for their inspiring introductory remarks. And with a bit of a personal disclosure, I grew up with Franciscans. So I'm always saying that the earliest environmentalists I ever met were the Franciscans who raised me. And you know, one of the most influential documents in the last years is, of course, the papal encyclical letter Laudato Si. And I'm saying that because there is one thought in Laudato Si which is so central for what we are doing. And the thought is that the social and the environmental crisis are one and the same thing. And this is more true than anything in food systems, because we have on the one side an agricultural and food production side. I explicitly want to include blue foods and fisheries. We have a system that is depleting our planet and at the same time not able to feed the people we need to feed. We have almost 700 million people on this planet who are hungry. But maybe even more shocking is that 3 billion people on this planet cannot access healthy diets simply because they can't afford it. And that means, for example, in times of COVID, that we are facing with billions of people who are particularly vulnerable to a pandemic. We are looking into children who have lost opportunities for their entire life by being wasted and stunted in early age, and in general, people who cannot develop their full potential as they don't have access to safe and nutritious food. At the same time, we know now that food systems amount to more than 1/3 of the climate emissions, and we are seeing the devastating effects of climate change every single day, from tropical storms to droughts, from wildfires to ocean acidification. We all are aware that the climate changing is not a future problem anymore. It is with us every single day. But at the same time, we are affording ourselves to a food production where 1/3 of all of the food produced on this planet goes to trash. And this is unacceptable. Now, what we are trying to do with the Food System Summit I believe, has a significance which it goes beyond the food systems themselves. I think what we are trying to do is a new model for the United Nations to work, because the UN classically is a club of sovereign member states who are meeting on ambassadorial or ministerial level. We are applying here the principle of subsidiarity. We are trying to reach people where they are, put people in the center, and create a process in which everybody has a voice, and particularly those who are furthest behind are given a voice. We are doing that by independent dialogues such as this one. We have by now 102 countries who are running national level dialogues, and we are inviting these countries to particularly include the indigenous populations, their smallholder farmers, their landless workers, particularly so these people who normally do not get a voice. In the independent dialogues, we can go to the regions, we can go to universities, we can go to cities in order to really activate circles of people who have not worked together. And that is one of the key points of this summit. Food systems are complex. It's not just an issue for a minister of agriculture. Food systems define our health. Food systems define our environment. Food systems are central for the future of our young people. And this complexity, this interdependence is often very hard to manage. But if you come to a city, to a village, to a landscape, this complexity becomes manageable. So while framework conditions need to be created from the top down, it is even more important to build from the bottom up the communities of practice we want to work with. Now, let me say 2 words to the other summit structures. There is a global thinking machine, I would call it, with 5 action tracks, looking into access to safe and nutritious food for all, change to sustainable and healthy diets, nature positive production, building livelihoods, and resilience. And if you put those together, we will have 15 action areas looking at the different aspects of food systems. These can be an inspiration for work on the ground. There will be coalitions to be built in which you might want to be a part, from anything from landscape restoration to school feeding, from fortified foods to better the nutritional situation, to building resilience against shocks from climate and other issues. These will be informed by independent dialogues like you. So it's a two-way street. We are listening to what you have to say. We are eager to learn from you what worked, what didn't work, which connections are vital, which connections are missing. And we want to bring this expertise back to the world in this area of actions. And my last word goes to my colleague and friend Oliver Oliveros, who has brought us together here, who is running a champions network of around 200 high-profile champions from all over the planet who help us connecting between the global, the pre-summit in Rome, the summit in New York, and the local, bringing their constituencies, bringing their expertise, bringing their networks together. But I think the most important message about the Food Systems Summit is that we have almost 8 billion stakeholders. There is not one human being that would not be affected by food systems, that would not be an actor of food systems. So with that, I'm wishing your independent dialogue much success. I'm very happy to be virtually with you today, and I hope that many will follow your example and take their food systems in their own hands to save people and to save our planet. Thank you very much, and back to you, Oliver.
Thank you very much, Dr. Frick. And thank you for your words, no, and saying about the importance of looking at food systems. No, it's not only simply just looking at food or nutrition, but as you said, no, it's a complex system. And what you plan to undertake, no, in this summit is to develop champions who will be actually be able to look at food systems, no, in an integrated way. So thank you very much. And thank you also to all the participants who are here. We're actually more than 200 in this Zoom room. And well, we expect more than 300 no, have also signed up. And hopefully all of us no, can be what Dr. Frick said as champions no, of trying to push more reforms no, in the food systems no, in our country. So just in the next slide, just is showing that, as Dr. Frick actually said, the summit that will be held, and this dialogue is an opportunity to engage all citizens as food system stakeholders and bring about tangible and positive changes to the world food systems. No? This is an independent dialogue because there will be a separate forum that will be convened by government in the next few months. No? And I noticed that in the Zoom room, there are also many government officials who are sitting here and as observers, no, and wanting to look at what the processes are of coming up with actions, no, related to the food summit. No? But I think that many of you, no, are coming from civil society and the academe. I noticed many participants from UP Los Baños, Bulacan State University, LaSalle, the Southeast Asian Research Center for Agriculture, University of Makati, and others. No? So hopefully, through this dialogue, we want to establish a high set of principles and organize new actions and result the sharing of experiences, lessons, knowledge, and incorporating new metrics for impact analysis. We are very fortunate no, that the main organizer no, of this forum no, is Dr. Cielito Habito, the Professor of Economics and Senior Fellow of the Ateneo Center for Economic Research and Development and former Economic Planning Secretary of the Philippine government, who will be speaking to us no, in a while, together with other experts. So just to situate the discussion, so thank you very much, Dr. Shell, for helping us now organize this forum. As you know, the Food System Summit reflects the urgent need for global change. Now, its overall objectives are to ensure access to safe and nutritious food for all, shift to sustainable consumption patterns, boost nature-positive production, advance equitable livelihoods, build resilience to vulnerable shocks and stresses. These 5 areas will be the areas of dialogue that will be undertaken and will consist of the inputs in this forum that will help us reflect what actions that the different stakeholders present here will actually pursue in the coming years. Our conveners, including Dr. Habito, will provide some ideas on how these inputs can actually be undertaken. So just to show also in the next slide, the 5 main speakers, the other speakers now besides Dr. Habito. So in this afternoon's presentation, Dr. Habito will provide an overview of agriculture and food systems and the way forward. Dr. Roehlano Briones, the Senior Fellow of the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, will discuss his perspective on food security and nutrition in the Philippines, examining the demand side of the food system and issues and challenges in this area. Dr. Assunta Cuyegkeng, the Chair of the Leadership Council of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network Philippines, will be discussing rethinking sustainable consumption and lifestyles. Dr. Larry Digal, the Chancellor of UP Mindanao, will discuss innovating value chains and equitable livelihoods, or the supply side of this issue. And lastly, but not the least, Fr Peter Walpole, the Research Director of the Environmental Science for Social Change, will be discussing developing resilience against natural and social vulnerabilities. In this forum, we will have Dr. Habito, Dr. Briones, Dr. Cuyegkeng speaking in their first panel. Then we will have a question and answer period, followed by Dr. Digal and then Father Walpole, the second panel, followed by another question and answer period. So for this first panel, let me just introduce the 3 main speakers who will be talking on the 3 important issues that I've said. So first, let me introduce Dr. Habito. Dr. Habito is Professor of Economics at Ateneo de Manila University, where he's also a senior fellow and former director of the Ateneo Center for Economic Research and Development. He's also chairman of the Brain Trust and Operation Compassion Philippines. His op-ed column, No Free Lunch, appears weekly in the Philippine Daily Inquirer. In 1992 to 1998, he served as the cabinet secretary in the cabinet of the former President Fidel Ramos as Secretary of Socio-Economic Planning, heading the National Economic Development Authority. He holds a PhD and Master of Arts in Economics from Harvard University, Master of Economics at the University of New England, and the Bachelor of Science in Agriculture, summa cum laude from the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. Our next speaker in the first session is Dr. Roehlano Briones. In the next slide. He is a senior research fellow at the Philippine Institute for Development Studies, where he conducts policy research for the Philippine government with specialization in agricultural policy. He has authored numerous research papers, co-edited 4 books on agriculture and natural resources, rural development, food security, international trade, and the macroeconomy. He obtained his PhD from the University of the Philippines School of Economics in 2000 and did postdoctoral research at the World Fish Center in Penang, Malaysia. In 2017, he was the UPLB College of Economics and Management Outstanding Alumnus for Economics and Public Policy. Next slide, we have also Dr. Assunta Cuyegkeng, who is the chair of the Leadership Council, SDSN Philippines, and the director of Ateneo Institute of Sustainability. She is also professor of the School of Management at the same university and also the managing editor of the Journal of Management for Global Sustainability. And she was former vice president for the Loyola Schools of this same university. She finished her Master of Science in Chemistry from the Ateneo and holds the degree of doctorate, summa cum laude, which is from the University of Regensburg in Regensburg, Bavaria, Germany. So let's have a warm round of applause for our first speaker, electronic applause for Dr. Habito, Dr. Cielito Habito. We'll be tackling an overview of agriculture and the food systems the way forward.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Randy, for your kind introduction. And may I now share my screen. First of all, I'd like to express the honor of being the convener for this particular independent dialogue, all leading to the UN Food System Summit later this year. I bring into this, I guess, my own thoughts on, again, what has been described as an overview of the agriculture and food systems in the Philippines. And again, I will have to stress the word overview because it's going to be rather superficial. And I expect that the rest of the speakers this afternoon can go more deeply into the substance. But anyway, just to give you a quick idea of what I have in store, I'm really addressing 2 questions. Where are we now? And then how do we move forward? And let me just go right into it, but by going into the where are we now? And this starts with the exact situation of our agriculture sector in particular, and therefore food systems in general at the moment. And I describe it to be a challenged but resilient sector. First, it's important to point out that even as the economy deeply contracted last year, in the second and third quarters, where the contraction was actually the worst for the rest of the economy, agriculture and fishery and forestry actually posted positive growth. And it actually defied the recession that was induced by the lockdowns. And of course, as I said, the other major sectors, industry and services, were in major decline, immobilized really by the enhanced community quarantine, which is really lockdown. The only reason we got negative, actually both in the first and fourth quarters, was natural calamities, like the Taal volcano in the first quarter and a couple of others at the time. And then, of course, a succession of typhoons at the end. But I suspect that, I'm confident that if it were not for those typhoons, we would have posted positive growth continuously in the fourth quarter. And this is how the rest of the agriculture sector looks. If you look at the the breakdown according to major crops, it's a mixed picture. And by the way, let me explain that here in Ateneo, good news is blue, and the bad news is the other color. So if you see the other color, that means negatives in this particular table. And you can see that it's a mixed picture, really. Even though overall, agriculture posted the positive growth in the second and third quarters, well, we were also seeing some negative declines in other crops. So in short, the sector remains challenged. And while the overall sector has shown resilience, there clearly are challenges that have to be addressed. And this is really the subject of our way forward later on. Now, let me share some observations that I essentially borrowed from a report that my group called Brain Trust Inc. had actually prepared for the World Food Program. And this, by the way, was also led by the next speaker, by Dr. Roehlano Briones, this particular review of the food and security and nutrition situation in the Philippines. And one of the, well, let me share with you some of the observations made there in that book shown on the right. First, agriculture grew well in the early 2000s, but has actually slowed down in recent years. And you can see how this growth rate had slacked from 3.6% in the first 5 years of this millennium, and now down to just 1.2% in the last 5 years. Of course, this is still growth, and that's very important, but obviously much slower than it had been doing before. Now, another observation related to that is that agriculture became the drag on the overall economic growth in the past 15 years. If you look at 2001 to 2005, agriculture was growing even better, slightly better than the industry sector. But then after that, we can see agriculture sorely lagging behind in terms of its growth. And so literally, it was the one dragging the economy from growing faster than it could have grown. And so again, well, I will not go into the rest of the detailed numbers here. It's also a mixed picture, obviously. But again, you can see how agriculture's role in propelling growth of our economy has sort of diminished in recent years. A third observation is that domestic farm production has remained the dominant source of food for the Filipinos. And this is, of course, generally seen in how the self-sufficiency ratios for key food crops have ranged from 60 to 156%. You know, obviously, those well exceeding 100% are exportables. So the bulk of our food is provided by domestic production. Now, at the same time, food availability itself has actually improved. And this, of course, has been because of increased domestic production for the most part, and also because of imports that are able to supplement our domestic production. Now, the problem, however, or the challenge is that our agricultural productivity is relatively low compared to that of our neighbors. And this table shows you a comparison across some of our ASEAN neighbors in terms of the yield index. And so if it's 1 is the index for the Philippines as a base, just look at the bottom row. And so on average, across all our neighbors here, the productivity is actually greater than that of the Philippines. It's only in pineapple and to some extent palay, very close, where we are comparable in terms of productivity with the rest of the region. But in other key crops, as you can see, we are actually seeing well over 1 as the indicator, meaning they are doing much better than us in terms of productivity. And it also lacks diversification. In the Philippines, you can see how the percentage of certain crops has actually remained stagnant. In the case of cereals, for example, and of course that's dominated by rice, we see that in developing Asia in general, the role of cereals in total agricultural value added has gone down from 42% from 1970s to about 26% in 2012. But it actually increased in the case of the Philippines between those 2 years. And then if you look at others, we have similar situations. Although again, we can see that in the case of fruits and vegetables, we have had the same or less percentage, even though that has increased dramatically also in the rest of developing Asia, meaning they were actually getting more diversification by getting more into these horticultural products of fruits and vegetables. So The point of all this then is that there is wide scope for improvement in our agriculture and food systems. We have so much to be able to improve if only we put our minds and our hearts to it and do things right. So let me just move on to the immediate cause that we're seeing right now from the economic decline that has resulted from the COVID and the lockdowns that it entailed. Of course, all of this has been worsened by the natural calamities I already mentioned earlier, at the start and at the end of the year. First, poverty and hunger have escalated. In fact, hunger doubled from the 2019 levels into 2020. And here are the graphs that we could get from the social weather stations. On the left is the poverty measure, the self-rated poverty of social weather stations, which shows a somewhat record percentage of people who consider themselves not poor. In other words, only 16% in the surveys taken last year consider themselves not poor. The rest were either borderline poor or poor. And so this kind of low percentage for those who consider themselves not poor is really somewhat of a record. Now, on the graph on the right, you can see the result of the surveys on hunger, also by SWS. And at one time, it was actually at 30%, more than 30%. But anyway, if you look at the average for the year, the total hunger was 21.1%, as against the average of 9.3% in 2019, which means, again, that hunger had actually doubled on the average last year compared to the previous year. Now, the problem with this is that it already exacerbates the high rates of severe malnutrition that has already been mentioned by previous speakers, particularly stunting in young children. And of course, if you look at the stunting statistics, many of us are familiar with this graph of how it has barely moved since 2003. In fact, what we saw was an increase between 2012 and 2015. And happily, it has gone down again to 30.3, but that's still 1 out of 3 children, 5 years and below, who are severely malnourished and therefore stunted. And I think most of us know what this implies. This is literally a silent crisis because 90% of brain development happens before age 5. And so if a child is severely malnourished and stunted at age 5, he's damaged for life. And again, literally 1 in every 3 Filipino children. And in some parts of the country, it's 1 out of 2 were actually stunted, and therefore they are compromised for life. This is the sad reality of our future right now. Of course, the other thing that took a severe blow during the pandemic was education, because remote learning had to be the way to go. And if you look at these photographs, the one on the right in particular, teachers themselves have had to clamber up rooftops just to get a good signal to be able to communicate online with their students. So this has been a real challenge that brought about by this unprecedented, or at least unprecedented since the war, pandemic crisis. And so the very future of our country in social, economic, ecological, political, and cultural realms are being threatened just because of increased poverty and hunger, and of course, compromised education. So let me move on to how do we move forward then? And it's a rough road ahead. But I'd like to point out that the economy can really move forward on 2 important wheels, which have been the 2 most durable sectors amid the pandemic. One is the digital economy. I would consider that the rear wheel, providing the accelerated push, and the front wheel of agriculture, agribusiness, and food systems, which is what will provide for a more inclusive recovery and growth of our economy. Now, why agriculture and the food system? It seems to me very logical because number 1, agricultural production is prevalent all across the country. It has strong interlinkages with the rest of the economy because it's highly labor intensive, and it has strong forward and backward linkages with most of the other industries in the economy. Agriculture and regional economies also are the key to recovery from the recession because they are the ones where it's safest to open up. And finally, of course, the Department of Agriculture is now taking bold new directions, breaking away from past paradigms with much criticism from the traditionalists, of course. But I think we're all going in a promising direction now. So very quickly, this is the graph that shows you gross regional domestic product. And you can see again the contribution of agriculture, which is what these graphs point out in different years. And it's significant for all regions. So it's geographically inclusive. Agriculture is highly labor intensive. In fact, if I look at what industries account for the most jobs in the economy, agriculture, along with wholesale and retail trade, account for about a fifth of total jobs in the economy, close to 9 million of jobs. But those other arrows point to sectors of the economy which agriculture is closely linked to, including trade, of course, the number one, because all agricultural products and derivatives thereof have to be traded. Manufacturing, of course, agri-processing, transport and storage and logistics, and then, of course, restaurants and hotels at the bottom, which have to rely on agriculture for the food that they serve. In terms of contribution to GDP itself, agriculture may be a little lower down along with fishing, but again, it's closely linked to those on the top. And therefore, in a way, we can argue that agriculture can help drive recovery in the other key industries that are closely linked to it, if we are able to actually get agriculture assert its resilience through the crisis. Now, in terms of geographic significance, we can easily point out that if you look at the COVID-struck areas of the country, and where jobs, where the output or GRDP or GDP is also most generated, as well as where all the jobs are, it's the same red areas in the map. And so the implication of this is that the areas that can most contribute to restoring jobs, production, and incomes are also those where it's most risky to open up. And that tells us that the only way to go, the safest places for economic resumption to continue are in the countryside, where agriculture is the dominant occupation. Now, I will not say too much about the other wheel because this is not our focus today, but let me just highlight the third bullet here, which is the digital economy also helps foster accelerated agriculture and agribusiness growth, especially now because of the use of digital tools to improve the how things are done all the way from finance to field to fork. And I'm talking about farm finance, therefore funding farm production, but again, the whole value chain that goes to the consumer. And as we know, things like Uber type apps to connect farmers to their end users are helping cut through the layers of middlemen in the market, among other things, including also digital financial technology tools that allow farmers to access finance much better than before. So these are things that are, well, you can see the two wheels that I've talked about are complementary to one another. But moving forward, I just want to actually borrow from my friend, Dr. Rifemio Dong Rasco at UP Los Baños, who, by the way, is the new president of the Coalition for Agriculture Modernization in the Philippines, who proposes these ways forward. He calls them the design parameters for transforming the food system. First, shorter food miles. And what that means is we would see more localized supply chains with smaller carbon footprints, therefore, less food waste, and it also boosts our local economy. And I'm sure many of us have been seeing how vegetables and fish and meat are being delivered to our doorstep by enterprising people who are probably sourcing these from nearby and no longer all the way from Benguet for vegetables, for example. And this is a healthy development, we think. Second general feature is that there must be a greater farmer share of the consumer peso. So that means we have to have more community level value adding, product diversification, and direct selling, the kind that I was just talking about. The third important feature is disaster and climate proofing of our food systems. And this entails controlled environment facilities, diversification of our staples and not just be looking at rice all the time, and of course, improve logistics. A fourth item Dr. Rasco points out is low external input, the need to use farm waste and byproducts, good seeds, and multipurpose machines so that we can minimize the input intensiveness of our agriculture, especially inputs that are unsustainable. The fifth feature is consumer health and nutrition. We have to address that in our food systems as we move ahead. And I'm sure many of you have heard about this concept of the planetary health diet, which talks about reduced meat consumption and more of vegetables. Also, the idea of a more diverse food plate, and so on. In other words, the way that we actually structure our own diets would actually have important bearing on sustainability of the food system. And finally, of course, in general, minimal environmental impact. That includes things like biodegradable packaging using biological resources as the packaging materials. And this idea of getting away from too much monoculture farming into what is perhaps best termed as polyculture farming, as Dr. Rasco also likes to call it. Most of us probably know it more as multi-cropping or multiple cropping, but it's much more than that. The whole idea being be consistent with the need to preserve biodiversity as we also pursue our agricultural production and food systems development. So the key challenges implied out of all of these directions that I've just pointed out, also as pointed out by Dr. Rasco actually, is number one, decentralized low-cost energy so that you can actually energize all these activities that we now want to see on a more local level so that the value chains will be shorter. Multi-purpose machines and tools, promoting circularity in the food system. So again, you can actually have one side's waste being an input for another. Diagnostic tools are very important, as well as the digital apps that I've been talking about that are enabling farmers and actually exciting younger people to get back to agriculture amidst that general lament that people in agriculture are getting old and the young people are not coming back. Well, it's getting more exciting if we are able to apply those digital tools. And finally, key challenges to policymakers themselves. What are the things they have to be mindful of in pursuing a much improved food system? Well, of course, the key decisions involve choices between, well, figuratively, of course, arms versus farms, although it's less figurative in our sense, perhaps, because now we're talking about all sorts of requirements in the military arena. Efficiency versus equity are often in a trade-off, but they need not be if we do things right. And then, of course, the need to consider the nutrition and health of consumers against perhaps a conflicting interest of sustaining the welfare of the food industry, which are seen as tax-paying and therefore supporting the government. But again, in the end, I've always been guided by the policy yardstick of the greatest good for the greatest number. We have to be looking at measures and policies that promote the greatest good for the greatest number. Let me finally just point out that all of this is really dwarfed by the giant threat that is faced by all of us. And of course, many of you have probably seen this meme on Facebook or elsewhere, where COVID-19 is probably the smallest of our problems. The economic crisis that it has caused has actually become a much bigger problem now because it has translated again into hunger, among other things. But climate change is the biggest threat in all of that. But altogether, let me just conclude by quoting from an article I wrote last year, when I was pointing out again how agriculture survived the recession. And so agriculture, the fact that it saved the economy from even worse decline at the time, to me reinforces the long-held view that we must really look to agriculture and the food system as the economy's ultimate backbone, COVID-19 or no COVID-19. Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to entertain questions later on.
Thank you very much, Doc Shell. So let's give Doc Shell a warm round of applause, and for also helping give us now an overview of agriculture and some of the ideas that challenges that need to be undertaken. Let's now call Dr. Briones, who will speak on food security and nutrition. So, well.
Thanks, Randy, and good afternoon, everyone. So, is my screen sharing successful? Wait.
Yes,
yeah,
we can see them. Yeah, we can
and
see
it's it. It's on display, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. Right. So I've been asked to share a perspective, not the perspective, on food security and nutrition. And as I was developing this, I thought maybe we need to achieve a little bit better conceptual clarity on these, because often we use them interchangeably, and rightfully so, because there's considerable overlap between these concepts. So I thought that maybe in this talk, I'll have a chance to talk a little bit more about this relationship between food security and nutrition. And in light of that conceptual clarity, examine some recent trends in nutrition and food security. The previous speakers have mentioned a lot of facts and figures. I will probably burden you with a few more. Please bear with us for this whole day. It's very evidence-based dialogue we're having here. And since we have a fairly limited time, I'll just go straight to my concluding thoughts. So looking at this relationship between food security and nutrition. Food security first, because maybe we have a little bit better intuition about nutrition since we learned about this probably from kindergarten. But food security is a fairly newer concept. Perhaps we were first introduced maybe in high school. So the official definition, meaning worldwide accepted since the World Food Summit of 1996, is said that food security is said to exist when all people at all times have physical, social, and economic access to sufficient, safe, and nutritious food that meets their food preferences and dietary needs for an active and healthy life. So, food security, given that definition, talks about a state or a condition, a fairly abstract state or condition at that. So the obverse or the converse side is a state of vulnerability to, say, disruption in access. So we can flip that around and call that food insecurity. Now, when that vulnerability materializes as an actual disruption, then that is said to result in food deprivation. And maybe that can be accompanied by the subjective sensation of hunger as a result of being food deprived. Now, before we get too much into the abstraction, a simple analogy would be typhoons, right? So certain regions of the country are more vulnerable to typhoons compared to others. They have greater typhoon insecurity. So for instance, hello, is my screen okay? I got a prompt.
Yes, we're seeing you. Yeah, we're seeing you.
All right.
Yeah,
I'm
so
trying to get back.
and we're seeing also your PowerPoint as well.
It went back to the title page now.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Are we in the heading? Are we in the bullet a state or condition?
Yes.
All right. So the analogy is typhoons, right? So certain regions of the country, particularly on the eastern seaboard, are more typhoon insecure compared to regions of the country like Zamboanga Peninsula, where they nary a typhoon in decades or generations. Now that sometimes from time to time, let's say in Bicol region, they will realize that vulnerability in an actual typhoon, probably on average 3 to 5 times per year. For the entire country, we will realize that maybe 20 times per year as a whole. Now, going back to food, common example these days, very much on everybody's mind, is the supply of pork. So right now, there has been a severe disruption in the supply of pork. That happened because of the pandemic of pigs these days, which is the African swine fever, which caused a 24% decline in pork inventory in the country. So that's why with this shock to domestic production, then we have this response in pork prices and pork shortages. And so there's a very common association, and Dr. Habito has explained it very skillfully, between what local agriculture is doing and the state of our food security or our vulnerability to food disruptions. Now, that said, still, when you talk about the effort of measuring access, or even the state of the stability of that access, there's kind of a bit of a challenge. How do you actually go about measuring that? So as a practical matter, instead of measuring this abstract state of access or being stable, what we measure is realized outcomes, often at an individual level. So like indicators for hunger, or more to the point, indicators of nutritional intake or nutritional status. So here we see the relationship between food security and nutrition. For instance, the much mentioned figures a while ago of the FAO when it tries to estimate global hunger. Actually, when you tease out the details of that measure, it's actually their estimate of how many people are undernourished. So in fact, if there is a state of chronic food insecurity, meaning there are lots of instances where there is an actual lack of or food deprivation that is being realized fairly chronically, so that leads to chronic deprivation, then that manifests when we try to measure that as sustained below norm nutrient intake and therefore a state of malnutrition. So looking at this chain, it's quite obvious, right? Maybe I'm just belaboring it, that when you improve the state of food insecurity, you cure this chronic food insecurity, then you cure the chronic deprivation, and you will probably obtain better nutrition. So that's a very straightforward chain, but let's be careful. We can't just flip it around flippantly, pun intended. So food security is not the same as having proper nutrition. There's a very simple proof of that. Right now, the very prominent discussion is about double burden of malnutrition, where the prevalence in the Philippines, we've reached this point, right? The prevalence of obesity is actually the same or even greater than the prevalence of undernourishment. So even in the relatively food secure side, by many measures, this segment of the population is probably food secure, but definitely they're also in some sense malnourished in similar sense as on the lower side, the undernourished segment is malnourished. Now, looking at the trends, now that we have illuminated the relationship between food security and nutrition. We've seen the slide, Dr. Habito has seen the slide, but there's a little bit value added now because I have the 2019 figure continuing the time series. So among the various measures of malnutrition, the focus is typically on the 0 to 5 age bracket for reasons explained by Dr. Habito. And it's the stunting indicator that is often highlighted. And so it is moving in the right direction, downwards, at least until 2019. And most of the other indicators, whether we're looking at underweight, are mostly going the same way. A little bit of a deviation for the wasting, but probably the 5.6 to 5.8 between 2018 and 2019 are probably not statistically significant. And even the overweight for height measure in the 0 to 5 was 4% in 2018, improved down to 2.9%. So the movement is the right direction, although too slow. So if you look at 2019 hitting 28.8, very good compared to say 2003, but very, very far off track compared to in the next 11 years from this date, by 2030, hitting 0 or thereabouts stunting rate, which is our commitment to the second sustainable development goal. Now, I cheated a bit. I said normally we measure food security with nutrition. The folks at FNRI, which is the source of all of this data, they're cleverer than that. They actually figured out that maybe there are some other ways that we can try to approximate or measure food insecurity at the household level. Here they use the household food insecurity access scale, and they ask households several dimensions or indicators of being food insecure, those 1 to 9 on the leftmost column. And the recall period is the previous 30 days before the survey. And then depending on the response and the frequency in which the households claim to have experienced items 1 to 9, then they get classified as to whether they are food secure over the past 30 days, mildly food insecure, moderately food insecure, or severely food insecure. So the more episodes you experience of those 9 on the left-hand side, then the closer you are to the severe food insecurity scale, right? So looking at that measurement, they looked at 2018 and 2019, and they saw that the proportion of households that are food secure was less than half already in 2018, falling down even further to 36%. So you can already see it's moving in a kind of opposite direction. as what you saw for the stunting rate. Meanwhile, conversely, the mildly food insecure and the moderately food insecure rose. Severely food insecure, not a lot. So the food security status actually is moving in the wrong direction, at least using this household food insecurity access scale of FNRI. We have talked about the link from agriculture to food security, and that is undeniable at the national level. We already mentioned the example of pork, but how far can we push it, especially if we look at the household level? The answer is we can't, we shouldn't. It's wrong. The link to agriculture is tenuous at best. Just look at this indicator. The proportion of households that are food secure is much lower among the households engaged in agriculture compared to the households not engaged in agriculture. Or to put it the other way, households engaged in agriculture and in the production of our food supply are less food secure, quite an irony, compared to households not engaged in food supply. So if it's not agriculture being engaged in food production, what accounts for food security status? Turns out, and this has been mentioned several times and quite obviously, but now we have some numbers to demonstrate it, it's income. It's income that is the key ingredient, as it were, of being food secure. So among the highest income quintile, wealth quintile in the FNR survey, they're overwhelmingly food secure, as opposed to the poorest quintile, where a very small proportion are actually measured to be food secure. All right, now what you've been waiting for, because everything has been up to 2019. What happened in 2020? Aha, FNRI, again, those wonderful people there, they did the measurement, not as rigorous. There's a description in their website how they did this. It's not as rigorous as how they normally do surveys, but at least they made an attempt in the midst of the pandemic to try to update their food security indicator scale. So the areas are divided into low risk, moderate risk, and high risk, depending on the classification according to vulnerability to the health pandemic, the COVID-19. So for all the areas, actually the food insecurity, the state of the percentage of households that were food insecure went up from 40% to 62%, a 21 or 22 percentage point increase. And this happened across the board, whether the area was high risk or the area was low risk. In fact, it was the low risk and moderate risk areas that experienced a greater increase. Why is that? Well, probably because the high risk areas tend to be the urbanized areas where the disease is spreading more quickly. But these are the areas which tend to be a little bit more resilient compared to non-urban areas. So what was the problem? So remember, food security is strongly related to access. So what were the access problems that were mentioned by the respondents, by 53% of respondents who claimed to be food insecure? So no money to buy food and no money due to loss of job. Those are actually two different questions. So that's a big chunk. But there are also other access problems. No or limited public transportation turns out to have been a big problem for many of them because they don't have their own cars and they used to depend on, say, tricycles or jeepneys. But these are scarcer due to the pandemic or even absent totally. So they had to walk, and imagine trying to lug home this amount of food in the absence of that public convenience. Limited food stores in the area because a lot of stores in their vicinity shut down. And in a few of the household, about 5% said they're physically weak, being elderly, and they had no assistance to purchase the food. So access is a lot of it is to do with the income, but as we can see from these figures, not entirely, and we have to be aware of this wider spectrum of problems that could be denying access of households to food. Now, this is a very striking chart. This is the relationship between the stringency of the pandemic, stringency of the quarantine measures, and the household food insecurity. So you can see there the most intense, the highest level there in April. And you know what happened in April, right? The enhanced community quarantine. And as the time went by and the community quarantine got more relaxed, you can see the percentage of households that were food insecure going down, down, down. So there's a direct negative correlation between the stringency of community quarantine and the level of food insecurity that probably you could have guessed, but now again, we have some numbers to support that supposition, at least based on the methodology of the FNRI. So income seems to be a big deal, right? So because of the pandemic or the quarantine measures, the income went down and a lot of people didn't have capacity to buy food. Is income also correlated with nutritional status? Well, indeed. So again, here is the prevalence of stunting among 0 to 5 children by wealth quintile of the household. And you can see here that it is the poorest household in 2015 that tends to have the highest levels of stunting compared to the richest household. So clearly, there's income also affects not just the level of food security or insecurity, but also the nutritional status. All right, so here are some of my closing thoughts. Turns out that markets, or more broadly, the agri-food system in general, looking at all aspects, not just the agriculture, but the fact that people participate in this system by selling, say, their labor for money and using their labor to purchase food, from that food system. So markets are critical to food security down to the household level. So therefore, apparently letting markets work, in one sense, would greatly improve food security. So this argument made by NEDA, right? When you look at the markets not working in pork because of the disruption in local supply, then maybe we can, as a country, resort to overseas supply. So they pointed out that pork prices in March 2021, compared to before, about the last quarter of 2020, pork prices were 60% higher in NCR and 36% higher for the country as a whole. And in fact, meat inflation over that period was the top contributor, contributing 1.4 percentage points to the inflation rate. And so they argue that with more pork imports, then that the contribution of pork to the inflation rate will go down, and overall inflation rate will go down as well. So this is one way to show that letting market works implies better food security. Again, let us be reminded what I argued a while ago, that achieving food security might be necessary, but it is far from sufficient to ending malnutrition. And therefore, if our goal is ending malnutrition, we have to watch out not only for food security, but addressing the wide and multi-factorial factor conditions that lead to long-term nutritional status of households, especially its most vulnerable members, the children of those households. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Briones, Roel, for that very interesting presentation, and also for the very recent nutrition statistics that we provided, and the implications of food security, and looking at the wider market system in order to tackle the challenges of food insecurity. We'll have next Dr. Cuyegkeng, who will be presenting on sustainable consumption and production. And lifestyle, sorry. Right.
So there. So I hope you're seeing my screen. Yes.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay. So this afternoon, I'd like to talk about our sustainable food consumption, and not lifestyles per se, but interventions that can help us and support more sustainable lifestyles. So let me begin by looking at the definition of sustainable consumption, and it's usually partnered with production. And it has to do, of course, what consumption is, but what makes it sustainable is that it minimizes the use of natural resources and toxic materials, and minimizes the emissions of waste and pollutants over the life cycle of the service or product, so that the future generations, their quality of life, their needs will not be jeopardized. And this is actually, of course, highlighted in the SDG 12 on responsible consumption and production, which does not just focus on business, but as mentioned earlier, also agriculture, where responsible food consumption can be seen from the harvesting all the way down to the processing and I guess the distribution as well. So when we look at our food consumption, we often associate food waste with excesses. For example, when we go to buffets or when we have spoilage, no? So what this really means is that we are taking a toll on natural resources unnecessarily, because all of these demanded nutrients from the environment, but we are wasting that. No, at the same time, we are food spoilage will mean methane emissions, and you've heard earlier that greenhouse gas emissions can contribute to global warming, etc., etc. Now, what is not highlighted here, and what has been highlighted by Dr. Briones, is the fact that there is and Dr. Habito, is the relationship also to poverty. And I think, as you know, sustainable food consumption is really being put to question because of the poverty of our people. And I think you've heard in the Philippines the phenomenon of pagpag, no? That there is food scavenging. People go to the dump sites, go to the trash bags of fast food restaurants to recover whatever they can. They boil it so that they could kill the germs, supposedly, and have food on their own tables. So this is a real problem when it comes to lifestyles. We're not talking here now at the level of economy, the big economy, but at the level of what we can do personally, in our lifestyles. And it was mentioned earlier that, I think Father Mars mentioned, it's a wicked problem. The food problem is a wicked problem. And I'd like to focus on sustainable food consumption and look at it really as a wicked problem. It's a wicked problem because it's difficult to define. There are many ways to define it depending on the perspective, but it's also difficult to solve because there is no one solution. You need multiple perspectives, multiple disciplines to solve this complex problem. So it cannot just be solved by economic measures. You need other areas working together, and that's why in this approach that I'll look at today, I would like to look at systems thinking. I'd like to focus on we talk about food systems. Of course, there's a system in it, but what does systems thinking actually involve? Let me borrow from Leila Ajarolu about the 6 fundamental concepts of systems thinking. First of all, we need to have a shift in our mindset. We cannot see the individual parts. We cannot see just the dots. We have to look at the interconnectedness. We have to see the whole and the interconnectedness of the different parts of the whole. And this ability to see that interconnectedness is the synthesis aspect. No? We do not just analyze, but we synthesize. Now, hopefully, these 2 concepts will bring us to what they call emergence. No? The fact that we do not see things in silos means that there is this possibility that we see the outcomes of the interacting parts there. We see the synergies, and that can bring us new insights. Now, how do we learn more about this emergence? It's important to see the system itself. And many have already, there are many types of system mapping. This has been studied, but what I'd like to point out is to look at loops, feedback, basically. Look at how certain components of the system affect each other. In linear thinking, we only think of cause and effect. So A is cause, B is effect. But in a feedback loop, it is possible that A affects B, but it's also possible that B affects A, so it becomes a circular system. And that the understanding of how they influence each other looks at that causality, it looks at the relationships of the different parts of the system. So I'd like to take this to food consumption. The amount of stable food that we have is often measured by our own purchasing power, I mean what we serve on our tables, but it's also influenced by our level of socio-cultural influence. So for example, during fiestas, there seems to be a need to have excess stable food, and so on and so forth. But as you see, was discussed earlier, that purchasing power is influenced by our national economic performance, and that in turn influence how much we import, how much food we distribute, which in turn is correlated to the agricultural produce, no, or the aquaculture produce. And that, of course, leads us now to, if we have all this stable food, if we have all this agricultural produce, then it leads to food waste. And that food waste is not the only waste that is seen in the entire system. There are also emissions from transport. And it's also possible, it's not just possible, it is a necessity that we take from the environment water and nutrients, no, to ensure that our soil is good, etc., etc. Now, all of that talk about agricultural waste can lead to methane from the decomposition that leads to more global warming and to extreme weather. But the thing is, once we have all those extreme weathers, as Dr. Habito was saying in the first talk, once you have all of these disasters, it can limit the amount of produce that we have in agriculture. So you see that there could be a cycle as we see here. But what's important in systems mapping is that we see the linkages. We don't just see the individual parts. We want to understand how they are linked to each other. And now that we are more aware of sustainability issues, how can that influence the rest of the system? So now when we see how the arrows go, we call this a causal loop diagram, we see that it's much more complex than seeing singular lines, no? Seeing cause and effect. So what you see here are different areas of endeavor. Some are in the socio-cultural paradigm, the way we think. Some are in our state of economy and governance. Some are in our own health and well-being. The others are in the ecosystem. But what's important here is to see that a lot of these things are within the realm of human activities. These are things we could control. And while most of the production part, most of the business part would be in a different discussion, there are things that can be put at the level of personal lifestyle and choices. And so these are what I'd like to focus on. For example, can we rethink how much food do we actually need? Can we reduce that amount so that the food waste can also be reduced? Can we refuse excessive food so that we don't binge in eat all you can pre-COVID? No? Can we reduce the amount of food that can spoil, what we use, what we store? Can we replace processed food with fresh produce, as was mentioned earlier? Because processing already involves a lot of excess energy and waste. Composting, can we do composting? Can we go put things back in the cycle? But my question now is, if we want to do these things, are there support structures? Are there social cultural practices that hinder us or that help us? Or let's say, if we want to replace processed food with fresh produce, are there alternative options that are easily convenient to us? Can we go into planning? Do we have the tools to plan what we buy or and store? And if we want to do composting, is there a convenient way to do it? Because if it is inconvenient, people will not do that. Okay, so the question is, are there enablers in the system? So if you look at that part when we want to do personal management of our food, how we use it in our own families, for example, it needs socio-cultural enablers. It needs but for example, when you have a lot of buffets, when you have a lot of food bargains, how does that affect the way we control, that personal management? The other aspect here that is not so you see that these are separate loops, but there's another separate loop that I'd like to point out, and that is poverty. There is that loop where people now are resorting to food scavenging, and that they are totally separate from each other, the way we look at here, except for that amount of excess food. So what I'd like to point out is shifting to sustainable food consumption needs to have enablers, and the enablers have to look at it from the perspective of the entire system. For example, we are in different institutions. We are in civil society groups, we are in the academe. So we can have institutional interventions, no? Whether it's a school, a classroom, a community, an organization, or even our families. Can we put interventions that can create the wholeness of the system? For example, can we raise the level of sustainability awareness? Can we raise the level of poverty awareness? But then can there also be action in terms of extension work? Can we donate excess food? Can we show people how they can compost, have more access to composting or access to food gardens? So these are just small examples, but there could be other interventions that you can think of that can connect the different individual loops and can actually help create solutions, no? In other countries, this has been done. For example, excesses of groceries and restaurants are given to a grocery store that was headed by this chef, and it's accessed also by the poor people there. In Europe, it started in Berlin and is now being used in various parts of Europe. They have a community fridge, and of course, Jamie Oliver helped in increasing the interest in using food fridges, community fridges, where excess food is given and people take it, especially the poor who cannot afford. Instead of things going to waste, people donate their food. In the United States, in Baltimore, they have a program that encourages students to do farming, to do gardening, so that they can have access to healthy food. Locally, during the pandemic, some communities have resorted to using vacant lots for community gardens to give them access to food. And in other places, some families did not even need extra lots because they used container gardens. So these are initiatives. These are what I call institutional interventions, whether the institution is a family or something bigger. But these are interventions that can actually help close the different loops and may help people in their own way to be more food secure. Some say that the effort of one or these efforts may not have any impact. But what I wanted to show you through systems thinking is that there could be an impact if first the right loops exist in the system and we could help create the right loops. Second, if the intervention affects the right loop, if it is put in the right place. And third, if there are enablers in the system that hopefully we can all contribute to. So this is one way of rethinking our sustainable food consumption, and as institutions maybe challenge us to find other ways of looking at efforts that can have positive effects on the system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cuyegkeng, for that very informative information on some institutional interventions necessary for undertaking sustainable consumption. So at this point, we will have a brief Q&A forum, and this will be facilitated by Mr. Ruel Ravanera, the Vice President for Social Development of Xavier University and the current Executive Director of Xavier Science Foundation. Vice President Ravanera, Mr. Ruel.
Okay, thank you, Randy. Can you hear me? Randy?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes, we can hear you. Well,
yes, good afternoon to everyone. Maayong hapon sa inyong tanan. Mentioned, I am Ruel Ravanera from Xavier University, and I will be moderating the question and answer segments of our dialogue. We will have two. We're going to have
one now after the three presenters. And we have allotted actually 15 minutes for each segment. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. And what we did is actually from the chat box, we received more than 17 questions. And some of them are multiple questions, and they're very heavy questions as well. They would range from issues related to productivity, issues related to the producers' situation, particularly poverty, and the support that the government would try to give them, the young generation of farmers, the impact of external factors such as climate change, the impact also of the agribusiness on small farmers and the like. What we will do in the interest of time is that we will select only 3 questions for our resource speakers. I think there were comments, a lot of comments about how our speakers have really brilliantly covered the topics, and that maybe this is the reason why there are so many questions as well. But if you will allow us, we will limit the question and answer for now into 3 questions. We can also consider your questions towards the second Q&A. And don't worry also, because we will include this in the documentation, and hopefully some of these questions can be answered as well in the process. And then finally, also, there will be future dialogues that will happen, and that will be explained by Edgar towards in his closing remarks, because we want this to be just the start of these dialogues, and hopefully some of the questions can also be covered in those future dialogues. So for this segment right now, let me read 3 questions. And I think for one, this is coming from Sylvia Miklat of ESSC, and hopefully this can be answered by Dr. Habito or Dr. Briones or even Dr. Cuyegkeng. The question goes like this: how can agribusiness, while being the front wheel in accelerating the transformation of food systems, be made more accountable for actions and practices that have pushed aside small farmers and further marginalizing them in the move towards more corporate farming and in the promotion and sale of banned pesticides such as glyphosate? That's the first question.
Well, if I may take a first shot, there are 2 aspects there. One is, again, how can the needs of small farmers, of farm holders, actually be addressed as we, again, look at the agribusiness system. And here is where what they call inclusive value chains really comes to the fore, wherein it is really the relationship between the big players and the small players in the agribusiness and food system need not be a rival one, but one of complementation. And this, well, we've seen this, for example, one very popular example is the Jollibee Foundation's program of connecting small growers of onions with a giant chain, which actually procures and deliberately actually tries to procure from hundreds of small onion farmers the onions that they need for their various restaurants, not only Jollibee, but also the others they own, like Mang Inasal and Chowking. That is one example of how the needs of small farmers can be addressed, even with the presence of the large players. Then the other aspect of it, again, was the use of shall we say, banned chemicals, no? in the agribusiness system. And of course, unfortunately, in the Philippines, many of these substances that are already banned in the West, especially, are still being much used. And here is where, again, government really has to take the strong role in terms of the regulatory mechanisms we have. And clearly that has been very weak and sometimes too fragmented even. And enforcement has always been a problem in the Philippines. And we simply have to really double up on being serious about enforcement of regulations, especially if they have to do with protecting the environment, protecting the health and welfare of people. So, well, I'd invite my other co-speakers to chime in on this.
Yeah, so this assertion of corporate power, I think, is one possible reason is because there's not enough competition. So we do have a competition policy in Philippines, but as an operational matter, it's been very difficult because a lot of these agricultural markets are highly localized. So there's really, unless the Philippine Competition Commission sets up like offices in various, say, regions or even provinces where we might have pockets of uncompetitive exploitation along the value chain, then it's quite difficult. So maybe one can promote stronger competition by making sure that markets are well linked. So rather than say one island having just one processing plant, if we can improve the shipping lines so that traders from other areas can communicate prices coming from mainland so that the single processor in the island is not just exploiting the local farmers, then I think that's one way of improving the state of competition. The problem is we have a market system. So exacting accountability, from my perspective, would seem to be applying even market principles to check the most egregious abuses while still harnessing its many advantages and strengths.
Dr. Cuyegkeng, anything to add?
No, I will defer to the economists on that question.
Well, this one is related also to the economists. It's a general question. Does the country have the capacity to be self-sustaining? If not, how do we find the balance between food security and giving our small-scale farmers a chance to earn a dignified compensation? Maybe related to this is also the question about our lands, agricultural lands, being transformed or converted into real estate, all these subdivisions being set up and also. Yeah, but the general question is, can we be self-sustaining?
Well, let me address that question first, and a slightly different question first, which is related. And people often ask, does the country have the capability to be self-sufficient? And my answer would always be, yes, we do. The question, of course, is at what cost? And so, you can apply all the science that you can muster to be able to produce all the rice that we want, for example. But if it leads to a situation where rice is twice as expensive here than it is elsewhere, it's not exactly a sustainable situation. So that's why in answering this question about, does the country have the capacity to be self-sustaining? Yes, but this has to be balanced with, we economists are always known to be advocating for a more open trade environment, where the discipline of competition includes competition from outside. And if we are able to assert that our producers can be as productive and therefore competitive with producers elsewhere, then that is really the ideal situation that we would like to achieve, so that, as I said, you can get the greatest good for the greatest number, that people are able to access food, especially at a cost that that is not artificially raised because of the desire to protect just producers. You actually have to look the balanced interests of consumers and producers. And so what I'm really saying is that there are certain products and crops wherein we can be self-sufficient and still be competitive, but there are those that perhaps we can never be 100% self-sufficient, in which we have to be more open to supplementing competitive domestic production with imports.
Thank you, Dr. Habito.
Yeah, may I take up the second part of the question about land conversion? A few years back, I did a study, and I collected figures, estimates of the Department of Agrarian Reform. If I'm not mistaken, their estimate of cumulative land conversion legally applied is something like 150,000 hectares since the beginning of, so since the late 1980s, since the time they were authorized to do land conversion. So considering that total agricultural area of the country is about 10 million hectares, when you do the ratio, maybe it's not a lot spread over many years. Now, of course, the critique there I got when I presented this was, how about illegal land conversion? So I don't know anything about that. Maybe more satellite-based data sources could illuminate that. But just the logic of it, the built-up area cannot be as vast and as plentiful as the land area, simply because it's costly to build up, and convert into subdivisions and so on. We should also take into account the fact that a lot of these conversions are happening in already urban landscapes, mostly in and around National Capital Region, Region 4A, and Region 3. That's in the statistics of the Agrarian Reform Department. And that's because maybe the land use was actually worth greater in the long run in a non-agricultural purpose, simply because they were near the place where there's a lot of other economic activity already going on. That said, there's still a big crying need for this country to rationalize land policy. Of course, we can push this land conversion too far, certainly, and endanger our national food security. So there's got to be some balance struck. Unfortunately, for many years, our system of establishing rational land use sandwiched in Congress for whatever reason, and that's probably something that we need to address urgently so we can balance off all of these competing needs for our scarce land.
Okay, thank you for that, Dr. Shell and Dr. Roehlano. The third question is directed to Dr. Assunta. It says here, I understand the talk's focus is at the level of individual actions, but if we want to talk about food waste, shouldn't we also include food waste from the production and distribution stages? During the height of the pandemic, many farmers were unable to sell their product due to lack of access to markets, oversupply, or cannot compete with imported sources. If we can create institution or system chains, maybe these are possible points for intervention too.
Yes, I totally agree. And production and the whole aspect of the farmers, that's a very important part of the big system. But I think that's a different talk. That's a totally different discussion, because you need to study the system there also differently. If you want to study the entire food system, that's also possible. It's just a little bit more complicated. But yes, they have to be considered. The focus is rethinking our food consumption. That's why I focused on the individual and personal, with the hope that the institutions will also act as enablers. But the production part maybe could be better addressed in a forum, for example, with people who are in agriculture, people who are in business, food processing, and again, that it's a different discussion, because they are making decisions for a different for a different group. So since I was informed that many of you here will be faculty, administrators, civil society organizations, I thought that institutional interventions at our level are things that we could actually do. Because the other questions on changing the economy or changing, I think that's important to understand, but it's also what can we do? Much of what Dr. Habito and Dr. Briones have said are very important, but they're at the level of policy. And of course, you can influence your own legislators, but then there are also things that we can do. We cannot just say, oh, the government has to do everything. All the policies have to be done first before we do something. So what's important is, in a wicked problem, there are people working on policy, there are people working on the science, there are people working on production. But what can we do at our own level? We cannot just say, oh, the others can do all that and things will be fine. we have our own personal contributions. Our institutions have the responsibility to make our own contributions as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all for the responses that you have given to the questions. We also would like to thank the participants who have raised those questions. There are a number of questions that have not been discussed in the plenary, but as I've said earlier, we will include these in the documentation, and hopefully this can be addressed in the future dialogues. So that completes our first Q&A. Back to you, Randy.
Thank you, VP Rabanera, VP Roel. So thank you very much also to our first panel. So let's go now straight to our second panel, which will tackle value change and developing the resilience against natural and social vulnerabilities. Let me introduce our two speakers. The first speaker is actually Dr. Larry Digal, the Chancellor and Professor of Agricultural Economics of UP Mindanao. He served as Dean of School of Management also previously, and he finished his PhD and Master's in Agricultural Economics at the University of Sydney in Australia and Purdue University in Lafayette, Indiana, United States. Last but not the least is Father Peter Walpole, the Director of Research at the Institute of Environmental Science and Social Change in the Philippines and the coordinator of the Reconciliation with Creation for the Jesuit Conference of Asia and the Pacific. So let's have our first, at least in this panel, our first speaker, Dr. Digal. Dr. Digal, you're there.
Can I share my screen first?
Yes.
Okay. Can you now see my screen?
See now. Yes, okay. Yes, we see it.
So yes, thank you, Randy. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the organizers for this opportunity to contribute to this discussion, particularly on this topic on innovating value chains and equitable livelihoods. This topic is directly related to Action Track 4 of the Food System Summit, which is about advancing equitable livelihoods and value distribution. This action track is based on the reality that inequality and power imbalances exist in agricultural value chains, and that these small-scale producers, the farmers, fishers, the micro, small, and medium enterprises, women, and indigenous people, including landless laborers, are at a disadvantaged position. Adding the word innovating in this topic highlights an important dimension when we talk about advancing equitable livelihoods and value distribution. Clearly, innovation is part of the actions needed to advance equitable livelihoods and value distribution. In the interest of time, I would like to focus on the following points. First is the context, and here I'd like to focus on the challenges and opportunities faced by the small-scale producers in these value chains, and then present solutions offered thus far to help these small-scale producers based on our own work in our university and others in this area. From this, suggest a set of actions in moving forward, and finally summarize and conclude with some key points. I think it is important at the outset to frame the inputs or the points I would like to highlight in the next few slides. Here, I will build on the framework we used last time in a global research program called Regoverning Markets Program on linking small-scale producers in dynamic markets, where UP Mindanao had the opportunity to lead the Southeast Asian region and co-lead the policy component. So what's the context here? The first thing that we need to recognize is that the small-scale producers face dynamic, fast-changing chains or agri-food system. While there are opportunities exist due to increasing demand for food driven by increasing population and income, liberalizing markets, these trigger changes in the food chains to respond to these opportunities. And often, this requires restructuring the chain with changes in technology and financial requirements, even market structure. And this restructuring mounts a huge challenge to small-scale producers as they struggle to adapt to these changes because of limited assets and access to resources. Depending on their ability to adjust in this dynamic environment, they can be either in or they can be either out. Our goal here is not just inclusivity, but also to equitably distribute value created in meeting market requirements in the chain. Our vision is to make these chains not only inclusive, but also equitable, to eliminate poverty through jobs, better incomes, and value distribution, reducing risks for these small-scale producers without compromising the environment. Also, we are not just talking about small-scale farmers here. When we say small-scale producers, we mean poor, marginalized, or disadvantaged farmers, fishers, landless laborers, indigenous people, women, youth, micro, small, and medium enterprises in JEDA or GEDA, geographically economic disadvantaged areas that include conflict areas. These are incidentally the low-risk areas in terms of the spread of COVID. So there's an opportunity here following the argument of Dr. Habito in terms of agribusiness expansion. In fact, in the Philippines, we are talking about at least 80% of these types of small-scale producers I mentioned. Only 20% of the 12 million farmers, or about 2.4 million farmers in the country, are linked to value chains. These are the ones with regular production surplus. The 80% are not linked or regularly linked because they don't have regular production surplus. And some are farming at a subsistence level. This is 75% for Luzon, 83% for Visayas, 84% for Mindanao, and worse is the BARM region at 88%, or only 1 out of 10 farmers in BARM is linked to value chains. According to the World Bank Mindanao Jobs Report, where I was part of, including Dr. Habito, was our senior advisor, these 80% can be broken down to 3 categories: poor, near poor, or food poor. In fact, about 1 of 5 farmers is food poor, with the highest in Mindanao, about 27%, which is ironic because we are actually here in Mindanao known to be a food basket in the country, compared to only 12% and 23% in Luzon and Visayas respectively. So we have a small percentage of farmers regularly linked in these chains, particularly for Mindanao. And this linkage to the chains is important as it generates a lot of jobs. In Mindanao, for example, about 6 out of 10 jobs are employed in agricultural value chains. If you look at the share of agriculture, fishery, and forestry sector in the GDP of Mindanao, it only accounts for about 30%. But that will be doubled if we consider the agribusiness chain that includes food processing, logistics, for example. Based on the several value chains studied in the Mindanao Jobs Report, severe constraints faced by farmers, the ones in red color in the figures, these are mostly in the production node of the chain and not in the processing or marketing node. These severe constraints include extension services, farm-to-market road, and financing. So what are some solutions thus far to help these small-scale producers achieve our goal to make these value chains inclusive and equitable, to eradicate poverty without compromising environment? In the Governing Markets program that we implemented more than a decade ago, several entry points were identified. These included collective action, business models, policies, institutions, support systems, and research and development. So let's look at some evidence that these entry points work from some action projects and programs where I was involved in as an evaluator or part of the implementing team. These were projects that aim to improve income and participation of poor small-scale producers in a number of value chains. These projects or programs address various elements in chain development. As you can see in the slide, you have poverty, environment, indigenous people, gender, and conflict. That conflict here refers to the coverage of conflict areas or conflict as an element embedded in the approach or model, like the last model there or project, the LIFE model. LIFE stands for the Livelihood Improvement Facilitated Extension. This is a project of UP Mindanao funded by the OST. For example, we asked farmers if the project has improved their income. Most of them said yes, 80% of them. And when we asked by how much, about 40% of them actually increased their income by at least 30%, and more than a third increased income between 10 to 30%. It is also interesting to note that the impact varies across chains, gender actually, with higher increase in income for males compared to females, reinforcing the importance in developing gender-sensitive value chain development. We also conducted a quantitative analysis using counterfactual analysis, using in fact a double difference model, and showed an increase of more than 20% in income. The top 5 reasons that contributed to this increase in income were good appropriate trainings, effective facilitation of project staff, better technology, better infra and equipment. These findings also reinforce the main findings of the Regoverning Markets Program and other cases documented in sustaining benefits in linking small producers to dynamic markets. Actually, this covered about more than 50 cases. 39 of these were cases from the Regoverning Markets Program, 2 cases documented in the Philippines, and more than 10 cases we examined in our research in this area in various parts in the country. There are 4 elements that explain success in sustaining these benefits in these cases. First, you should have a receptive business sector. When the Governing Market Program was implemented more than a decade ago, inclusive business models were not yet popular then. Now we consider receptive business as one embracing inclusive business in sourcing their inputs. Second, we need organized and empowered farmers to make collective action and delivery of extension and support services more effective and efficient. And finally, a facilitating public sector that provides an enabling environment conducive to developing inclusive chains. In the middle of this triad is the effective partnership facilitation. Upscaling programs to link small-scale producers to market is being done not just by NGOs and government, but also academe like our university, but also private firms receiving development funds to implement projects for their inclusive business programs. So moving forward, what are a set of actions suggested for the Philippines to achieve equitable and inclusive chains? The foundation of success, the triad I mentioned earlier, is key to implementing strategies at the project or program level. But in upscaling it at the regional or country level, we need more than that. As highlighted in the World Bank Mindanao Jobs Report, which is also applicable for the entire country, it is essential to strengthen rural and urban linkage that recognizes the peculiarities or the peculiarities of the different farming systems in the rural areas and linking these to agribusiness hubs in the urban centers, for example. We do these by improving rural connectivity, and this includes connecting conflict areas. The key strategy here is to get the basics right, organizing farmers better, securing property rights, investing in human capital, delivering effective extension services, and investing in rural infrastructure while complementing this with reforms in the farm and non-farm sectors to provide an environment or an enabling environment that is conducive to doing inclusive business. And in implementing projects and programs to develop these chains, we recognize that the role of effective partnership facilitation, as I mentioned. And in doing all these, we need to innovate. But how? Well, experts say we need to bundle innovations. In December 2020, just a few months ago, a group of 23 experts at the Atkinson Sustainability Center, this is based in Cornell University in the US, tackled the same objective that we want to address. How do you achieve what they call HERS, or healthy, equitable, resilient, and sustainable, so that's HERS, agri-food system? One of the key recommendations is to bundle innovations because innovations required broad stakeholder participation. Single innovations are incomplete, and single technologies involve trade-offs. Yes, there are trade-offs when we innovate the agri-food system. We both have positive and negative effects, particularly in terms of achieving the Sustainable Development Goals due to the direct and indirect effects of technology domains in the food system related to these SDGs. This slide will show you, based on research from this group, this expert group, the trade-offs, the positive and the negative numbers you see or effects of various technologies such as cellular and digital agriculture across different SDGs. For example, robotics as applied in agriculture can have reinforcing effects represented by the blue arrows and counteractive effects represented by the red arrows. These are the negative effects. In terms of the negative effects, this technology, for example, can lead to displacement of labor, which will have a negative effect on SDG 8, on decent work and economic growth, or to higher occupational risks, which pull down SDG 3 on good health and well-being. Or it can have positive effects represented by blue arrows by improving management quality or reducing food loss, for example, which will have positive effect on SDG 12, responsible consumption and production. So let's bring this to a Philippine example of innovating agricultural value chains. UP Mindanao has a newly approved artificial intelligence robotics program called ASIMOV, or Autonomous Societally Inspired Mission-Oriented Vehicles. One of the objectives is to build aerial and land-based robot prototypes to address issues of national importance, such as improving agricultural productivity. So the application I used here is to use AI robots to get data, for example, to analyze the incidence of Panama disease. This is the fusarium big problem in the Cavendish banana industry. So using the previous example, this innovation will definitely impact the food system related to SDGs and can have both negative and positive effects. Another example of applying Industry 4.0 technologies is the DigiCo-op, which is, I think, relevant in our situation now under pandemic. I bumped into this because of our partnership with an ICT group involved in this initiative, where UP Mindanao is developing the data analytics component for their digital platform called Aggregate. The DigiCo-op and their website says revolutionizing the co-op sector through digital revolution. This is the real will that Dr. Habito mentioned to push our agribusiness and economy forward. This is organized by the leading co-ops in the country, and their plan is to a nationwide rollout of DigiCo-op business centers engaged in these platforms like fintech, e-commerce, logistics, etc. So to conclude, if you want to achieve this vision of equitable livelihoods for small-scale producers, we need to improve rural connectivity and get the basics right and ensure effective facilitation, partnership facilitation in implementing programs. And we need to innovate in doing this and ensure that the benefits produced from implementing and bundling these innovations are shared equitably in the chain. Thank you, and maayong hapon sa atong tanan.
Thank you very much, Dr. Digal, for highlighting the importance still of value chains and what are the implications, especially for our small producers. So the last but not the least speaker will talk about economic and environmental vulnerabilities, and developing the resilience against them. So we will have Father Pedro Walpole who will be speaking to us about this topic. Father Pedro.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we hear you.
That's good. I can't see anyone out there, but someone is there. Thank you for inviting me to engage in this discussion for a better human, environmental, and economic resilience. I'm not an expert in the field. I'm in the field. I need to arrange the shots. I'm here in Mindanao, and we're looking at the drivers of fragility in the food crisis. Obviously, here in Bukidnon, we have some historic events, but they continue with the seasonal variabilities, particularly of La Niñas and El Niños. We have the economic shocks. It's 20 years ago when Nestle pulled out, but it affected a generation of farmers. Rubber prices today fluctuate. Falcata documentation is an impossibility. And we're now being promised that bamboo will be the answer. But I think we'll lose on transportation. We don't seem to mention the conflicts that people are caught in, and this is one of the collateral damages that continues in Mindanao. And of course, the various disease contexts that we have. In a recent study where we looked at what actually small farmers get and who the small farmers are, they're getting 5% of the gross revenue for their planting. Small farmers in the uplands grow corn the way you play bingo. That's their sense of economics. If they win, they make it big. And all the traders tell them they're going to win big. Of course, they have to absorb all the risks. They have to absorb the fact that the trader can suddenly down the price because he says, oh, with my technology, I can tell you now the price is decreased. So the technology helps squeeze the life out of the farmer this far away from the center. This is why the farmers have no income. And actually, they were more secure before the corn came in because na talaga yung mga konsumo. Now they have corn sprayed with glyphosate that they eat, they hide and eat like scavengers that poisons them slowly. And they're pressured to open up every piece of land because they haven't met all the payback requirements. So there's a huge injustice with the agriculture that has come to the uplands. And then, of course, they're blamed for burning into the forest. And that's where we see another level of technology put to the use, that only suppresses farmers all the more. Mindanao used to be a land of promise. We're not seeing that promise fulfilled today. And we're seeing a huge loss. Bukidnon, which is hugely mountainous, is losing most of its forest below 1,000 meters. The degradation is sustained. The soil degradation, nobody speaks of that, but soil today in corporate agriculture is used as a medium to hold a plant. It's not used as a growing power. Everything is put in from NPK to all of the chemicals and the poisons that come out in the water. At what stage glyphosate will become a carcinogenic problem in the Philippines will be told by future generations. We are not tackling corporate transparency in the matter. There are grave gaps in the agriculture we're running at the moment. We've been trying to work with the youth, and we've been working with FAO on this for many years, actually. Trying to see how we can work together, basically sustaining livelihoods and landscape. And FAO has done quite a bit in terms of forest and family farms together, but they don't actually seem to put any money behind this. It's become more a window dressing that can be pulled out at times than actually a major strategy. We've had some very good figures already, so thank you. I will not repeat some of them, but this is just to say what the cumulative economic output of smallholders is. It's quite significant when we look at it. We're getting about 100.5 globally, yeah, in terms of the smallholder sectors, including the timber, the wood production, non-wood forest products, energy, fuel, wood, charcoal is there as well, and agriculture. The problem here is the role that, again, corporates are playing uncontrolled in the process. And as was raised very earlier on by Dr. Cuyegkeng, which is very helpful, you know, do we really live an integral life? I often ask the students before in Manila, do you know where your water comes from? Do you know where Angat Dam is? Do you know who lives there? What about their well-being? So we've got to look out for the well-being of all. And this is a major challenge today. Industrial corporations, I am sorry, are not benign and benevolent. They have many good programs, but behind it is an increasing extractive power that we have seen in the last 20 years increase the margins of poverty. So there's a huge challenge there that we need to come to terms with. I'm not going to go through the problems of factory farms and industrial crops, but I think if many of you saw what went on in the chicken farms, you would wonder what you're eating. I'll go back to the prayer earlier today, and one of the initial quotes, going back to the Holy Father, when nature is viewed solely as a source of profit and gain, it has serious consequences for society. This vision of might is as right has engendered immense inequalities. The winner takes all. And for upland farmers, it takes their food as well from their very plates. So without going into the details and without talking about the Bill Gateses of the world and what the global figures are, what needs to be done? And many of these things have been engaged with already, but we've talked already of the direct incentives, policies and priorities. We need policies for people, not just for the economy. Yeah, we need support for the very large, small-scale sector. Unless we're willing to invest small scale, farmers here in the uplands have no access to money. They have access to 5, 6, and 10% interest every month for 4 months for a harvest. That's how they lose all their money. The rates are criminal. We need principles of agroecology, not principles of the chemical industry. We are certainly going down the road of chemical industrial agriculture. And first stop are pigs. We feed more pigs in Mindanao with corn than we do people. And corn used to be our staple. So we have many things to update ourselves. And I really, and we are globally asking the FSS to add a track on transforming corporate food systems. Corporate food systems are really the elephant in the room. We're very nicely move around them. And our silence, yeah, because we don't have all of the answers that are needed, our silence actually affirms their role, yeah, and their ability to advance. And accountability in the South is very, very difficult to get. So I agree with the speakers that have already talked of that. In the South, it's very difficult to get the accountability we need. So here again is a system from FAO. It's 10 elements of agroecology. Very good. We've seen diagrams already of this and detailed extensively. This was used in a further discussion with a global group that I engage with in terms of agroecology and what the principles of agroecology are in terms of scientific research approach to agro ecosystems, food ecosystems, with principles of enhancing resilience from the bottom up. It's also a socio-political movement. Yeah, it's changing urban areas. I remember in Cagayan de Oro many years ago, people started with communal gardens there. It's very important that we have these examples so that the youth can engage and take up the challenges, because this is the challenge of the youth. Radical Partnerships was one of the titles in my section there. It really is the food, water, energy nexus. You know, indigenous people know best the water sources in the mountains. Why are they not empowered to sustain those? Why are they pressured by corporate interests for more corn? And even the spring areas are now burnt and cleared and planted with corn and sprayed with glyphosate. And this is a standard process today. I can name the villages from here to Inahog that are treated in that manner. There's a lot more that can be done by our business schools. We had many of the graduate students come here before the COVID event to study what is happening in the corn industry. There are many global frameworks of relevance that we really need to connect with and get a movement in. I'm watching my time there, my apologies. This was just coming from the report. So one of the things that we're asking both locally and globally at this stage is a further track in this food systems sustainability. To really look at this partnership of the food system summit with the World Economic Forum. That to me is, and to many, is too convenient. There are conflicts of interest that we're not seriously reviewing. Sometimes the corporations are bigger than the countries. We need a much more holistic process, and this is where we've all talked of the multidimensional nature of food. So we need to tackle this seriously and address the expansionist nature of corporate agriculture. I'm sure it does help increase the economy. It also helps increase the poverty and the malnutrition, and I can say that from a reality of Bukidnon. And there is a need to strengthen, I am sorry, in this entire process, human rights in the basis for the global management of food systems. Yeah, so maybe I end there. Thank you very much for my excess time.
Thank you very much, Father Pedro, for that very interesting presentation on how can we live up to the agroecology principles. I know it's already 4:25, but I think maybe just beg the indulgence of the participants if we can extend maybe 10 to 15 minutes more. And we'll just have maybe one or two more questions that will be facilitated by VP Lavanera. Sir Joel?
Yes, thank you, Randy. Yes, in the interest of time, we will just have one question each for our resource speaker. For Dr. Larry, this is a question from Floro de Lapag from Xavier University. Is there a possible association between predominance of corporate farming in Mindanao and the very low percentage of value chain inclusiveness of small-scale producers? He's asking if there is that relation.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yeah, definitely there is an association. And if you look at the literature, particularly in Mindanao, you see mixed results. For example, we did part of the Mindanao Jobs Report was the Cavendish banana value chain analysis. And there we looked at several strands in the value chain for the Cavendish banana, because there you have different contractual arrangements. There's a contract arrangement, there's a lease arrangement, and the contract arrangement, this is contract growing, is with the individual or a cooperative, and there's also a spot market. But the results there showed that actually the best share that the small farmers extracted or got from this chains were farmers in the contract growing under a cooperative. And the least net income, actually, that's a profit analysis, is for the spot market, because prices are varying and they don't have enough technical assistance. So that's a very different result. You see also other studies which showed the other way around. We also did a study in poultry, for example. We're looking at the different, earlier it was a question, this is very much related to the question of market power in the chain. And we did a chain analysis in the different nodes in the chain. There's a supermarket, and then the poultry integrator processors, and then there's a farmer. And the one that's sort of extracted the most benefits or rents or profits in the chain was actually the processor. It has, in fact, in terms of the bargaining power with the supermarkets, because these are branded poultry integrators, they actually extract the most rents or benefits in the chain relative to the other players, including the farmers. Yes, there's definitely an association, and I think more studies should be done in this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you for that answer. Can I now address this question to Father Walpole? This is a question by Erica Brondo from Ateneo. How can farmer cooperatives be empowered in including their farmers as enablers in the sustainable food system?
My involvement with cooperatives was a long time ago. We've gone through a great history of them. My sense is really it's skills, capacity, and a development in co-op management is crucial at this stage. I really feel if we're looking at Guatemala and other countries where we've been looking at the coffee business there and that, the cooperatives are very successful. I think our success in part has been spotty. So I feel it's got a lot to do with capacity, and where you can really only run cooperatives, you know, they're an advancement in shared cropping. You can only really run it where there is a decent income. Farmers should be getting an income. The problem with the moment in terms of the larger scale agriculture is that it's breaking down shared cropping. And now with the likes of the corn industry, that community collective and collaborative support of helping one another and sharing in the crop is now dissolved, and it's become a financial exchange. So to respect, we really need to respect some of the cultural values, capacities, and systems that already exist and see how we can enable them, rather than come in with a top-down answer. But see what the community is willing to do. And I feel, certainly coming from the Ateneos and that, Muswan, is really to develop that capacity and that trust. We need very much socially a trust in order for systems to develop. I don't know if that helps.
Thank you, Father Walpole. I think many appreciated your sharing, and there is a suggestion here for you to write a book on how this, how you can implement these suggestions in the context of the present socioeconomic, political, mainstream life. So thank you so much, Father Walpole. Thank you so much also, Dr. Larry, for sharing those insights and ideas in this independent dialogue. Again, we thank all those who have raised their questions. We received a number of them. We will try to incorporate all these in our documentation. And hopefully this can be discussed in the next or in the future dialogues. Thank you so much. Back to you, Ran.
Thank you again, the VP, the Vanera. Thank you also, Chancellor Digal, and also Father Walpole. We're supposed to have, after this Q&A, closing remarks from our speakers, but in the interest of time, maybe we can just invite our main convener, Dr. Habito, just to speak on, maybe give some closing remarks and on the challenges of strengthening food systems in the country, and how do you enable people to continue that dialogue, to think about alternatives, to improve the availability of food, ensure nutrition, and also to also maintain this agroecological lifestyle, as Father Walpole said. Dr.
Okay, thank you, Randy. I guess very quickly, I just wanted to point out that the name of this dialogue actually focuses on, I think, one word: system, the food system. And it so happens also that the central presentation, that of Dr. Assunta Cuyegkeng, precisely talked about how we look at things in a very systemic way, look at it as an entire system. And I think this is really the key word for all of us. We have to look at it as a system of very many interconnected and interrelated parts. And of course, it's understanding that systemic relationship is not enough. We also have to all act collectively and integratively in our particular efforts to actually address the system as a system. And that means it demands a lot of interaction, a lot of communication, and knowing what everybody else is doing for us to be able to act in this systematic way to precisely address the challenges facing the entire system as a system. And so I think what this tells us is that as we move towards the UN Food System Summit, there have to be more of these independent dialogues, covering hopefully even more stakeholder groups, farmers were mentioned as those who may be missing from this particular one, but it was not intended to be a comprehensive audience, obviously. And so this is the kind of work that we need to continue doing as we move forward. So let us all think systems. Let us all think holistically and integratively of all the little problems that we're seeing. Because again, we can't go on looking at our little particular view of the big elephant, right? So let us now try to all look at the entire elephant and see how we can help that elephant really help the lives of everybody in the country and of course in the rest of the world. So on that basis, I hope that we'll all continue being open to working with one another and of course invoke the blessings of Almighty God in helping us achieving this collective effort. So thank you. God bless us all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Habito, Dr. Shell, and also to all our speakers who have made very excellent presentations this afternoon. So thank you also, Dr. Briones, Dr. Cuyegkeng, Dr. Digal, and also Father Walpole for their very interesting inputs. And as shown in the chat, many actually are wanting to get also your presentations also as well. So thank you very much for all your insights that you've given us this afternoon. Before we just have, and again, I beg the indulgence of the participants, we just have two more speakers. The next speaker is Mr. Oliver Oliveros, the Food Systems Champion Engagement Lead of the United Nations, which will give his reflections on our discussion this afternoon. Mr. Oliveros?
Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, congratulations again and to the organizers for this very fruitful discussions. We are thrilled to be here today, and I'm personally glad that the Philippines were present in the UN Food Systems Summit process. So the Food Systems Summit is aimed at empowering people to leverage food systems as accelerators to progress and to realize the 2030 vision, which is a sustainable development goal. But we live our life currently in a paradox. Food losses in industrialized countries are as high as in developing countries. But in developing countries, more than 40% of food losses occur at post-harvest and processing levels. And this is important because Philippines is essentially, an agricultural country. So there's a lot there to look into. While the world produces enough to eat, not everyone is able to access that food. And as we think food, we need to address dietary balance to ensure nutrient value as well as food quantity. The double burden of malnutrition is increasing, where we have growing numbers of both overweight and undernutrition in our communities. And then there is food quality and control. How can we regulate and ensure that we keep standards, whether it is at food production, fishing, or at food transformation and packaging? We have also heard that there's a long-term challenge here, COVID, and how we seem to be losing a generation of students, of young people who are unable to study properly and prepare for their future. The economic crisis, which is further aggravated by the pandemic, and the climate change being the biggest threat, perhaps next to us, the way we behave as consumers or the way we behave as eaters. So it is important to think across the food systems value chain, but also across different sectors, from environment to water sanitation to land use, soil regeneration is very important, so that no one solution adversely affects another part of society. Sabi nga ni Joey Ayala, ang lahat ng bagay ay magkakaugnay ang lahat. And the UN food system will serve as a turning point in the world's journey to achieve all these SDGs. But then again, it's just a moment in time. We know that we need to get back on track. Transform our food systems is among the most powerful way to change course. Rebuilding the food systems of the world, of the Philippines, is among the most powerful way to change course. We need to build back better from COVID, and we all hope and pray that the country will be back to its feet sooner than later. So this dialogue today, and one that will take place in the future, are important cornerstones of the summit and of our future. And I think the emphasis should be on action, because it's critical to ensure access to safe and nutritious food, to promote sustainable consumption, to boost nature-positive production, agroecology, regenerative agriculture, to promote equity and equitable livelihoods, and ensure resilience. So mga kababayan, for centuries and across cultures, food has been and continue to be a crucial part of our lives. Literally, our survival depends on whether or not we have something to eat. Gatherings and exchanges are not the same without food, and food is an essential element of our identity, of our families, of our cultures, and our societies. But profound changes in the way food is grown, processed, distributed, consumed, and wasted over the last several decades threatens a future of food that is sustainable, equitable, inclusive, and secure. And the current food system is broken, as we all know, and it has to be fixed. We are all part of that food system. And so we all must come together to bring about the transformation that it needs. We are invited not only to sit on the table, but to set the table, to prepare the menu, and take our meal together. You've been invited. We've all been invited. We just need to respond. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oliveros, for that point about really undertaking actions in order to achieve our goal of strengthening the food systems in our country. And with that, let me just turn over the floor to Mr. Edgardo Valenzuela, Edgar or Ed Valno, who will food security advocate and also a core faculty of the Ateneo School of Government, who will also discuss what we need to do to meet all of these challenges. So Ed.
Thank you, Randy. I think we've had a very full afternoon, and we should just look forward. What are the next steps? And essentially, it's really looking at, as we've said, promoting community dialogues. We should not stop here. We've had a very good start. We've seen ideas from the macro to the micro level. The interventions of Dr. Cuyegkeng, Father Walpole are very instructive in what Oliver just said. And so we should be able to look at food systems talaga, because we and the local communities that we work with have to understand what it means to look at it from a food systems perspective. Raising of awareness on the issues and interconnectedness is not enough. I agree we should try to move forward to try to brainstorm and look for solutions that we can attempt at the small level, as in small communities, and see what can be done. Perspectives of community groups, of marginal groups, of even faculty, students, and other communities, neighborhood associations, consumer groups. All of the groups are very important to be able to move ahead. After all, we want a comprehensive societal approach. To share information on these innovations and other perspectives that contribute to achieve the SDGs. We have to keep on harping back on that, because if it's going to be business as usual, nothing will happen. I mean, I've spent the last 25 years looking at these issues, and I can tell you, if we don't change now, another 20 years is nothing. And you can even look at it in terms of our political systems. We're only talking about 2 administrations away. Will we be able to solve the food and malnutrition problem in two administrations? So lastly, I think the key is really to be able to promote continuing dialogue and reflection and action and collaboration at the levels we can do. We've had, we are proposing in the next 5 or 6 weeks that we organize community dialogues at your level. What you can, small groups of 10, maybe 15 persons, talk about the issues. You've heard a lot today. Just take a small slice of that and then discuss it, look at possible solutions, and then email it back to us, the outcome of your discussions. And we will plan to put together also the results of all the community dialogues that are sent back to us into a synthetic report to synthesize it along the issues that we've discussed today, so that we are able to make a substantive contribution to the preparations, to the pre-summit preparations. We've taken a commitment that we will prepare report out of this meeting, as well as the subsequent community dialogues, which can be inputted into the pre-summit conference in June, late June in Rome, which hopefully will also be taken by Dr. Navarro's committee, who will make for the actual summit in September. I'd like to close there and end there. The facilitator's guide is available. Please tick it off and say that you want a copy, and it will be sent to your email address accordingly. Thank you very much. Randy, I turn the floor back to you.
Thank you very much, Ed. So again, you will all agree that this afternoon was very fruitful, very enlightening, and also challenging to meet the goals of ensuring that we have a viable, sustainable food system in the country. So I think let's all give our speakers a round of electronic applause. So I think you can type in the chat, or just click the clap in your Zoom bar. So
thank you, Sir Ed, for bringing all
sorry,
together.
over time.